I'm pushing the record button. I don't know where it goes. Jory will tell me what happens to this afterwards.
It goes to the cloud.
Yeah, Ava, can you
It's magic.
restate what you had stated a moment ago about the tiering, because that was great and I wish I'd recorded it.
Okay, so here's what sort of a synthesis of a couple things other folks have said so far, plus my ideas. The governing board has, by the charter, empowered the TAC with technical oversight for all technical projects in the OpenSSF. What we're proposing is the TAC then empowers working groups, each with a narrow or a defined scope of a charter. The working groups have a regular cadence of reporting back to the TAC of their progress, their status. The working groups are empowered to create projects if they need to create one from scratch, do it whenever they need to, and to accept a project contribution from some company. There is a legal review process needed for the acceptance of a new project. In either case, the working group must share that information with the TAC, ideally an email on the mailing list, and definitely a mention in their next sync point with the TAC in a TAC meeting that is public and recorded. This creates the transparency, from projects to working groups to TAC to the community at large, and it creates a clearly scoped charter for each entity. And the TAC still has oversight to say to a working group, hey, your scope is creeping. Let's talk about that. Or, hey, this project is a duplicate. Let's figure that out.
If I may quickly add, it doesn't even have to necessarily be duplicate. There's many reasons to notice, oh, there's connections. And so I think that's the big missing piece today, is the TAC exists, but there isn't as much communication back and forth, and we want to fix that.
We need to fix that. And I think what we're all seeming to agree on is the organizational structure of governing board TAC working group project is good for this organization, as long as we have clear charters and a reporting backup process. Bob, and then Sahindra.
I don't know that I'm ready to express a strong opinion on this, but I guess the question that comes to my mind in this model is, do we end up in a situation where we have, I'm just broad brush numbers here, tens of working groups, and each one's pick up, single digit projects. Therefore, we end up with, a large pool of great innovation. Notifying the TAC to say we've accepted this and each of these projects matures is awesome. But it raises the question again in my mind as to, for the project maintainers, why would they donate their project to the OpenSSF? And for us strategically saying we're going to bring all these things together under a single banner, an open question to folks, and then I'll drop the mic and I'll unfortunately have to go. But the notion of, do we see the OpenSSF being a body that when we mark a project as graduated, that is a strong signal to the industry at large that the broader open source community has looked at this, we've vetted it, we feel like this is something that's going to fundamentally address one of the critical issues that we see in the market today. And we want to continue to raise money and energy to ensure that is successfully adopted and maintained going forward. So it comes down to that sense of, if that's a pyramid, a hierarchical organizational model, and it's a pyramid there that kind of aligns to the project progression through those life cycles. Having that strong vision statement of the graduated projects of the OpenSSF will be X, the incubated projects do Y, and the sandbox serves as the innovation cauldron for feeding that engine. Awesome. I just don't know that statement itself has been universally agreed to by a majority of the community right now.
I think it would then be worthwhile to validate my assumption that is a statement we want to be able to make with the community at large and with the whole TAC. So I do think it is a worthwhile goal, but other voices may disagree. We have a ton of hands up, so I think I saw Sahindra, Jory, Steve, David.
Yeah, I have more tactical questions. One is when Persia started, we were under Bootstrap, and I didn't see that word referred to anywhere in the documentation that I copied over. So, where is Bootstrap sandbox? Is Bootstrap not sandbox? Is it gray? So that is something I would like to understand. And then I have a comment about the hierarchy between OpenSSF TAC and then working group and then project, and the kind of free flow of information, because from my observation, it has taken us a little bit longer than I was patient for to get projects moved, to get projects what do you call the goals of the project heard at all levels. So is having working group necessary, and then for projects that cross cut those working groups, where do they fall, especially Persia?
So my understanding is Bootstrap didn't exist in the CNCF. It is something that the OpenSSF kind of invented as a concept. And it applies both to projects and working groups. And the phase of a stated intent to join, but not yet accepted. Once it is accepted, it would be in the incubating status, most likely, not necessarily. Right? I've seen a few situations where something is accepted directly into Sandbox. I know a different team in Microsoft spun something up that they were looking at, meeting the 5 public meetings bar before applying to join. So I'd say that was in the bootstrapping phase. I think Persia is in the same, doing its own thing for now with the stated intent. So we can call that bootstrapping. And I'd love it if we add that to the docs as a part of our process. Jory, David, Steve, I'm losing track, sorry.
I'll just jump that and kind of keying off something Bob said about, what does the TAC kind of want? One thing that I think will be very helpful to us as we sort of begin to manage influx of interest, either from people wanting to start projects, new projects under our umbrella, or bring existing projects under our umbrella, would be for the TAC to possibly draft some kind of document stating some like priority work areas or something, and say, signaling to the community that right now we're looking for projects and work to really push forward in these spaces. If you've got, another idea, that's great, but we're probably not going to want to be evaluating that right now because our priorities are XYZ. And I think maybe because that's not 100% clear, we're getting a little bit more of a smattering of different types of projects that make it feel more scattered.
That's a fantastic suggestion, Jory. I know that I've seen more mature communities that already have all the process defined do exactly that. Yeah, so I love that. I hope we can get there soon because it would definitely help. Steve, David?
Works for me. On the pyramid that you've been describing, Persia doesn't really fit into that because there's no working group that exists in the OpenSSF. And there's other projects, like I'm on the board of the Artelias project under the CDF, and we're thinking about moving over to the OpenSSF, and it's currently incubating over there. So there's a couple other entry points I think that we need to look at other than coming from the working group world that you're familiar with.
Great point. And I've been approached by a couple other projects as well that don't fit the working group model. I actually had one of the developers in Gidra approach me a couple weeks ago. David, Arnold.
Yeah, so I actually think that we should expect that some projects aren't going to fit within a working group or worker group model, and that's just fine. And we've already done it several times, so obviously other people have agreed to the same. Of course, Bob ran away. Good, but he asked questions and then ran. But I wanted to respond to something that he said because I think it's a valid concern about working groups. If there's tens of working groups, each of which only has one project, there's kind of no point to the structure. So I think the intent for creating working groups is we're going to have a number of projects, many of them smaller, that are going to have to work together or coordinate because they have overlaps and goals and such. And so I think that's where the working group construct starts to make sense, where things are going to overlap, need to work together. And so if there's a whole bunch of working groups with only one little project within them and there doesn't seem to be much purpose, maybe that needs to get brought in. But I don't see that as a problem right now. I think we've only had one proposed new working group since we've started.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a likely problem.
I'll point at another example out there in OpenStack or Open Infra Foundation. They have the concept of a top-level project, and some of those have nested projects. They have a working group, and a working group is scoped and time-bounded, usually. It produces some output. I might be mixing up a working group and a SIG. They have a working group and a special interest group, and one of them is time-bounded. It's like, I'm going to write a white paper that describes a thing. When that white paper is done and published, the working group checks in and might dissolve or might reform to do something else. And the other one, SIG, again, I might have them crossed, is not time-bounded, but it is designed for a cross-project collaboration point, which, David, I think is kind of what you're saying.
Yes.
That projects report directly to the TAC. And then there's also a set of coordination across projects that report to the TAC, but facilitate a bunch of projects working together.
I'm not sure you said what you meant.
I'll give an example. The OpenStack telemetry working group doesn't directly own a code deliverable in the sense of a top-level project, but they do develop a couple libraries, and those libraries are used by dozens of projects to ensure they all have consistent telemetry. So the telemetry working group is chartered with make sure all the technical projects are doing telemetry in roughly the same compatible way. I could see the OpenSSF with a similar structure where a bunch of top-level projects report to the TAC. We've got maybe less than 10 working groups, like best practices, ensuring all the projects are following our own best practices, or supply chain integrity, ensuring that any projects we have are following the guidelines around supply chain integrity that we're publishing and recommending to others. We're also dogfooding. So David, is that what you're suggesting, or a model that you like?
I was thinking, if I can quickly reply, just more of a model similar to what we've been doing, which doesn't mean we have, by the way, we can change, but I think right now the working groups own most of the projects, which tend to be smaller, by the way. And by own, simply providing some oversight, collaborating between, and then the TAC doesn't have quite as many projects to directly oversee. Rather than what you described, though. Hey, you want to change it? Great. I want a structure that's going to help us keep working. That's my real goal, and the rest of this is just mechanism to get there.
We've got 42 repos right now. I don't know what they all are, or how they report to each other, or who's got authority over what code.
I actually probably know the most of any one individual, and I'm sorry for me.
But Eva is touching on a different point, which is another problem we need to fix. Is it's hard to know what the relationship is, right?
Yeah, I've actually been trying.
What the relationships are.
Right. I've actually put in a number of GitHub PRs because I believe that every working group should list every project within it. If every project should list where it lives, either what working group or if it's a top level project, hey, we report to the TAC. And basically there should be pointers both directions.
Absolutely.
I can't agree strongly enough. That has to be in
Absolutely.
the README file of every repo. Where does it fit in our org?
I have tried. I'm not entirely sure I've been successful, but efforts have been made.
And let's keep doing it. Thank you for your service, David. Arnold and Steve.
Yeah, so when you were describing the model you had earlier on with the projects underneath the working group, like always, I was biting my tongue to say, well, it doesn't have to be this way, because I thought maybe it's a simpler model, and the simpler the better. But I tend to agree with David that maybe you need a bit more flexibility and allow projects to be directly under the TAC. Otherwise, I wanted to say, in LF land, it's a big land now. There are so many different projects, so many variations. I think we need to be careful not to kill ourselves with some, too complicated a model. We need to be, to adopt something that works with what we have today and what we can expect immediately to come, and then anticipate that, okay, we may have to evolve this model over time. And I think every LF project has been going that way, and we shouldn't bite too much at once.
With that in mind, are you leaning towards the flexibility of some top-level projects and some in working groups?
I still think that's kind of a needed feature, because it maps what we have today.
Okay.
Yes.
Describing what we have today is pretty good, and then evolving from there. Yeah. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No worries. So just kind of coming full circle on this, for what Sahindra is working on, which is outside the scope of working groups, I think we definitely need to document what working groups and that progression looks like. But for Persia that's coming in that doesn't have a working group, and the PR that he has in flight, what do we need to do for next steps to make this happen? And then I have a comment about the whole working group hierarchy thing.
Given the discussion we just had and what the consensus it feels like we're reaching, which I'm comfortable with, I think Sahindra's PR could be maybe split, with the first PR in the series really trimmed down to what are the stages, because we all seem to agree on that, and adding a little bit in there that describes the relationships between projects and working groups that we were just discussing. That's going to be whole cloth new because CNCF doesn't do it. So that's sort of a description of the structure we have today, along with the description of the tiers that the CNCF has. That's probably not that contentious to land, I hope. And then the second PR might be describing the gives and gets for each of those tiers and the reporting cadence and structure for projects, working groups, and TAC. That'll probably be more contentious, take some refinement, but be really valuable to projects like Persia coming in to understand what are the levels they should target, what do they expect in return. And then the third one would be the actual process. Here is the form to fill out or the template to fill out, because that we don't know yet what we're going to put in there, depends on the first two. So how does that sound to folks as far as a process goes with landing this PR?
That works for me. I think, like you said, it's breaking it down into smaller chunks. I think we'll be able to make some progress instead of getting hung up on certain topics. and
not breaking it down by files in the PR, but by stages of where we are today to what we don't know yet.
I agree with that. I think you need to start with essentially a skeleton, and then you keep fluffing things up around it.
Yeah.
Fleshing it.
And then one comment on the working group hierarchy with the repos and stuff like that. I think we need to adopt the landscape image. And currently, likely, if you look at the CNCF or the CDF landscapes, they don't include working groups in the landscape, but I think we could adopt that as a possibility. So because you can, in the landscape diagram, you can have a working group and then its children underneath it. That may be easier for people to understand, and then it's kind of self-maintaining for those working groups to kind of, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing.
Rory, I thought you'd have a comment on that.
Yeah, so I've been slamming my head against the landscape tool. The landscape tool was not exactly invented for this purpose. We can make it work, but I had a similar thought to you, Steve. Like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could just use this thing that visualizes da 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 da. Not really, but we could hack it to death, and I'm not sure that that's time well spent.
I do not think it is time well spent right now.
I think a visual, to Steve's point,
yes,
is time well spent. And David and I have spent some time together trying to figure out what that visual is. So we had a couple of diagrams that we were using in our sort of like OpenSSF sort of relaunch pitch deck that we want to revisit because they're kind of busy and they don't really describe the hierarchy. So we actually think this might break down into 2 or 3 different visual pieces. One for the community to understand what projects we have and where they fit in like the solving of the supply chain security problem. Another would be to help people visualize like the structure of our organization. And yet another would be to help them understand the more of like the detail of like, you know, what the groups are doing and how they connect with each other. So I
would really like to see a diagram like the one I just flashed on the screen. That visualizes the governance structure we were just describing. I really want to see that for this organization. So maybe if that's a good starting point.
Yeah. We've kind of got one, but I just don't feel like it's communicative enough. I'll share what we have so far with the group.
Yeah, if you can email it around or maybe open a PR with it and just mark it as like do not merge so we can comment on it if you want comments. I'm happy to, I don't know. But
feels like art where you're like, this should look like an owl. Does this look like an owl? I'm not sure, you know.
I like ravens. Yeah. I think helping the community visualize the governance structure as we're landing that first of 3 patches or first of 3 PRs will be really helpful. I don't think the graphic has to be in the first PR, to be clear, just like once we've agreed on it, visualizing it. Steve, to your specific point, I think some of the projects that we have do lend themselves to the sort of CNCF landscape style, but that's a very small number of the projects we have. If over time the OpenSSF adopts many more projects that are technical deliverables, a service or a scanning tool that folks can run, maybe it starts to form a relational model between functions in the security space. Maybe, well, you know, signing projects and storage projects and integrity scanning. I don't know how that looks yet, but a lot of the projects we have today don't do any of that.
Well, and remember that the landscape models that are currently out there not only include projects, but also other software that may be commercial and it's designated whether it's open source or commercial on the landscape, so people know where to find things. So I think the landscape's gonna be bigger than what it is today if we bring those in as well.
Speaking of landscapes, I did draw this. I don't know if folks have seen it, to try to describe the overall landscape that software supply chain security occupies. If this paradigm makes sense to folks, it might be a useful sort of framing for a CNCF style landscape of like, here's the specification formats and projects that fill that niche. Here's, tools and process like in Toto or Connoisseur from SigStore. Here's metadata storage projects, part of SigStore. And so maybe there are other ways we can describe the landscape besides working groups that do map better to the OpenSSF. Just putting that out there. It is a little bit orthogonal, by the way, to our focus here. So I'm going to pull us back for the last 5 minutes. What are the action items after today's call?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I mean, we talked about splitting the PR, but Sahindra, I mean, are you up for that? Because that's your PR at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we can split it in many ways. But
are you clear on what you need to do?
No, I would like to know the steps and sort of communicate it. Yeah.
Okay, if I may, I think there's been a general agreement that the idea of of ranking projects in terms of sandbox, incubating, graduated, archival is a useful construct. I certainly didn't hear any pushback against that and having criteria to meet those. I very much liked, as you can tell, my earlier Ava's construct of thinking about, the TAC is pushing down to working groups in many cases, charters, here's your scope, you create lots of projects, but there has to be reports back in order to create, in order to make sure that there's no issues when things are created. So I think basically a process. So I think we need to identify those levels, and we need to identify the process for creating projects that involves TAC at least TAC notification, so that so that there's fewer surprises going forward.
I think oversight is a better word in this case, because I think the TAC really should have control over that.
And according to the governance documents, right, the OpenSSF legal charter, the TAC must. So I tried to capture those 3 phases in a note in the chat that we can. Any concerns or things missing?
Yeah, I will quickly observe that historically, that's not how the OpenSSF has operated. I think that's a problem. That the working groups, and nobody's trying to be a bad thing. They're trying to get things done. But just, the working group would say, yay, go, and the TAC never hear about it. And that's something I think we want to change without slowing things down. I think that's the goal. Is we don't want to make people wait for 3 months. That's not the goal.
You have to find the middle ground between being exactly.
Yeah, I do believe the current TAC all agrees on that point, that we do need to increase the transparency and bidirectional communication, both through meetings, mailing list, and the README files and repos. The TAC seems all aligned on that on the last several calls, which is why we're having this focus session. So, Sahindra, with what I wrote down there in the chat, is it clear enough, or do you have any questions?
I do have one question. One thing that we had discussed before was creating a branch so that we can have a working version. I will need help creating a branch. I was not able to do that myself on the OpenSSF TAC repo.
Okay.
And the second thing was I'll start doing the work and start posting progress on the TAC channel, like as a thread. So let's, if we are active there, please give me feedback there.
Yep.
and then you can guide me
please
along. Yeah.
feel free to tag people, at me either in Slack or GitHub, so I get notifications.
It will do.
Awesome.
Sadly, I must run.
I must run as well. I felt this was a really productive meeting. Thank you all so much. I hope you all felt it was helpful too.
Before
Do
you
we
go,
have a
Ava.
follow-up call on Friday or not?
Yeah, that's my question.
Yes.
Ava, before you go, you posted something in the chat, the 3 phases, next steps. Have you got a copy? Because that will disappear.
Good points. I will drop that in the TAC channel on Slack right now.
Yeah, I was going to do
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Friday's meeting, is that happening or are we going to postpone it?
Friday's meeting's happening same time. I'd love to just review any status that Sahindra has by then, and maybe if it's a short meeting, that's great. It's a Friday.
Yeah. And after Friday, I'll be out of pocket for a week, so I'll be available,
Okay.
but I won't be able to actively work. So that's when I'll hand over to somebody who can sort of take it forward.
Gotcha. GitHub doesn't make that super easy to work on someone else's PR. So Jory, if you're here, or David, if you can help Sahindra get a branch up, merge everything by Friday on the branch so we can pick it up from there.
Yep.
Yes.
Will do.
Cool.
Okay.
And I will probably be picking up in Sahindra's absence for the week to keep things
Sweet.
moving.
Thank you for
Awesome.
helping.
Thank
All right,
you all
thanks,
so
everybody.
much.
Oh, good
Bye.
combo.
Good
Bye.
convo, yeah.
Cheers.